A cold wind howled through the empty streets as Sergeant Jake Carter walked home after his night shift. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening, until he heard it. A desperate, frantic barking. He turned his head. A German shepherd stood in front of a crumbling, abandoned house, its fur matted, eyes wide with urgency. The dog wasn't just barking, it was trying to warn someone. Jake frowned. Something felt off. He took a cautious step closer. The house had been empty for years, yet the dog acted like something or someone was inside. Then the barking stopped. Silence. A cold chill ran down Jake's spine. That was never a good sign. He reached for his flashlight, shining it at the house's entrance. The front door was slightly open. Had it always been like that? The German shepherd let out a low growl and darted inside. Jake hesitated for only a second before following the dog. His pulse quickened. The air inside was heavy, stale, filled with a strange metallic scent. Then he saw it. In the corner of the darkened room, a rusted chain, and at the end of it, a skeletal, shackled hand. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The dog whimpered. Something horrible had happened here. And the worst part? This was only the beginning. The wind howled through the trees, rustling the dried leaves across the abandoned house's front yard. Jake adjusted his backpack, eyes fixed on the German shepherd standing frozen in front of the rotting door. The dog's ears were perked, tail stiff, body trembling, not in fear, but in anticipation. Jake hesitated. Why was Max acting like this? The house had been empty for years. The townsfolk whispered about it, about the family that vanished without a trace, about the strange noises still heard from within. Jake had never believed in ghost stories, but standing here now, in the bitter night, with Max refusing to move forward, he was starting to have doubts. "Come on, buddy," Jake said softly. "It is just an old house." Max did not budge. Instead, the dog let out a low, rumbling growl. Then the front door creaked open, on its own. Jake's breath hitched. His pulse thundered in his ears. The house was supposed to be abandoned. No one had lived here in decades. Max took a step forward. His nose twitched as he sniffed the cold air. Then, before Jake could react, the dog bolted inside. "Max!" Jake called out, rushing in after him. The second he stepped over the threshold, the air grew thick, like stepping into another world. The scent of dust, mildew, and something faintly metallic lingered. Jake swung his flashlight around. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the furniture coated in years of grime. But the most unsettling part, there were footprints in the dust, fresh ones. Jake's throat went dry. Max was already ahead, sniffing the air, his body tense, muscles coiled as if expecting something to jump out at any second. Then, a soft creak came from upstairs. Jake froze, his grip tightened on the flashlight. He wasn't alone. Max growled deeply, his gaze locked on the staircase. His instincts were screaming at him, and so were Jake's. A cold bead of sweat trickled down Jake's neck. He had two choices: turn around and walk away, or find out who or what was upstairs. Taking a shaky breath, Jake stepped forward. The wooden stairs groaned under his weight. Max was ahead of him, his paws silent against the dusty wood. Halfway up, Jake noticed something carved into the railing. Letters, a name. Lucas, 1987. His stomach twisted. He had heard that name before. Lucas Montgomery, the boy who disappeared 4 decades ago. A chill ran down his spine. He forced himself to keep moving. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into darkness. There were 3 doors. The first door was slightly ajar. Something inside had moved just moments ago. Max took the lead, stepping carefully toward the door. His nose twitched, ears alert. Jake followed closely, heart hammering in his chest. He pushed the door open. The flashlight's beam cut through the shadows, revealing a dust-covered nursery. Jake's pulse pounded. A crib sat in the corner, swaying slightly, as if someone had just touched it. A tiny stuffed bear lay on the floor, torn apart, its stuffing spilling out. But Jake's eyes locked on something else. The wall. Words had been scratched into the peeling paint, words written by someone desperate. "Help me!" Jake's breath came in sharp gasps. He took a step forward, his boots crunching on shattered glass. His gut screamed at him to leave, to turn around and forget everything. But then, a loud bang from the closet. Jake jumped back. Max's bark shattered the silence. His flashlight trembled in his grip as he turned toward the closet door. It was shut tight. Another bang. Something or someone was inside. Max growled again, stepping closer. Jake reached for the doorknob. His fingers hovered over it, his breath shallow. Then, the knob turned on its own. Jake staggered back, his chest tightened with fear. This was wrong. Max lunged forward, barking aggressively, and then silence. The closet door slowly creaked open. Jake swallowed hard, shining his flashlight inside. The closet was empty, but then he saw it. Chains, shackles, a rusted padlock hanging from the wooden beam inside. Jake's skin crawled. Someone had been locked in here. His stomach twisted. He turned back toward the room, his heart hammering. And then he saw it. The crib. It was rocking. Max let out a sharp whimper and backed away. Jake's breath hitched. The closet had been locked from the outside. That meant whoever had been trapped in there had not been able to leave. So who, or what, had just opened the door? The hair on the back of Jake's neck stood up. He turned back toward the closet, dread coiling in his gut. And then he heard it. A faint whisper. It came from right behind him. Jake spun around, but there was no one there. Max barked frantically, stepping in front of Jake, his body tense. The dog's eyes were fixed on the mirror across the room. Jake followed his gaze. His flashlight flickered, and for a split second, he saw a figure standing in the reflection. A boy, no older than 10, wearing a torn white nightshirt. His eyes were wide, hollow, pleading. Then he vanished. The flashlight slipped from Jake's grip, clattering against the floor. Max let out a whimper, pressing against Jake's leg. Jake stood frozen, his mind racing. He had just seen Lucas Montgomery, or at least whatever was left of him. Jake stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. The reflection in the mirror was gone, but the weight of its presence lingered. Max, his loyal German shepherd, whimpered at his side. His ears twitched, eyes still fixed on the mirror, as if he could still see something that Jake could not. Jake sucked in a shaky breath and forced himself to move. He retrieved his flashlight from the dusty floor and flicked it back on. The beam shook in his trembling grip. "What the hell is happening here?" he whispered. His mind raced. Had he really just seen Lucas Montgomery, the boy who disappeared decades ago? He turned toward the crib, its gentle sway finally slowing until it stopped. Silence. The weight in the air felt suffocating. But Jake knew one thing: he needed to find answers. He swallowed his fear and looked down at Max. "Let's go, buddy." Max huffed, but followed as Jake stepped toward the closet where he had seen the shackles. He crouched down, bringing his flashlight closer. The metal was rusted, the chains old, but there was something new here. Scratched into the wooden floor beneath the shackles were 3 letters. L.M. Jake's stomach twisted. Lucas Montgomery! He reached out and ran his fingers over the scratches. The grooves were uneven, hurried, as if made in desperation. Max suddenly let out a low growl. Jake snapped his head up. Max had moved toward the far side of the room, sniffing aggressively at the floorboards. His tail was stiff, his body rigid. Jake's pulse quickened. He stood and slowly walked over, kneeling beside Max. "What is it, boy?" Max's nails scraped the wood, and then a hollow sound. Jake's breath hitched. The floor here was different. His fingers brushed over the boards, feeling the slight gap between them. A hidden compartment. Jake glanced around the dimly lit room, then back down at the floor. His hands trembled as he wedged his fingers beneath the loose board and pulled. The wood lifted with a creak, dust swirling into the air. Jake coughed, waving it away, and then froze. Inside the hidden space was a small wooden box, locked with an old rusted latch. His fingers hovered over it, hesitant. Max let out a soft whimper. Jake exhaled sharply. This was it. A clue. With steady hands, he lifted the box from the floor and placed it on the nursery's worn-out rug. He examined it closely. The wood was chipped, dark with age, but one thing stood out. A name was carved into the lid. Lucas! Jake's pulse thundered. He reached for the latch. It was rusted shut, stiff. He hesitated for only a moment before gripping it firmly and snapping it open. The lid creaked as it lifted, revealing its contents. Inside, wrapped in a decayed yellowed cloth, were 3 items. Jake swallowed hard and carefully unwrapped the cloth, his flashlight illuminating the object. The first item was a black and white photograph. Jake carefully lifted it and held it under the light. His breath hitched. The photo showed a young boy around 10 years old standing beside a German Shepherd puppy. Lucas. Jake's eyes narrowed. Lucas had a dog, but something about the picture was wrong. The boy's expression wasn't happy. His eyes were wide, his lips slightly parted like he was mid-sentence, like he was scared. And in the background, just barely visible, was a figure. A shadowy, indistinct shape standing behind the boy. Watching. Jake's fingers tightened around the photograph. Who was that? Max whimpered beside him. Jake glanced down, his own unease growing. He turned the photo over. There was something written on the back, in faded ink. He's watching me. Jake's breath shuddered. He quickly set the photo aside and reached for the next object. It was small, old and corroded with time. Jake turned it over in his palm. What did it open? His mind immediately went to the shackles in the closet. Or worse, the locked attic door he had seen earlier. Axe sniffed at the key, his nose wrinkling slightly. Jake's thoughts swirled. Was Lucas locked up in this very house? He clenched his jaw and reached for the final item. Jake carefully unfolded the brittle, yellowed paper. The handwriting was messy, uneven, like someone had written it in fear. The words sent a chill down his spine. I hear him at night. He whispers my name. He says, I will never leave. Jake's fingers tightened around the paper. His stomach twisted with dread. Who was he, and what did he do to Lucas? Max suddenly let out a sharp bark. Jake's head snapped up. The air in the nursery had changed. A cold breeze slithered through the room, despite the windows being shut. The light bulb above flickered. Jake felt it, a presence, a whisper, a sound so faint it almost wasn't there. Jack! His entire body went rigid. Max growled, stepping in front of him protectively. Jake's breath came in short gasps. Someone had just said his name, but there was no one else here. His flashlight flickered again. Then a loud thud from above. Jake's heart nearly stopped. Max barked furiously, his body tense. The attic. Something was up there. And now Jake had a key. His pulse roared in his ears. His mind screamed at him to leave, but deep down he knew. He was already too far in. The answers he needed? They were in the attic. Jake gritted his teeth and stood up, gripping the old rusted key tightly in his palm. Come on, Max. He turned toward the nursery door, stepping into the darkened hallway. The house was waiting, and so was whatever lurked above. Jake's hand tightened around the rusted key. His breaths were shallow, heart hammering in his chest. The whispered voice still echoed in his mind. Max stood beside him, body stiff, ears pinned back. The dog's posture had changed, not just alert, but outright aggressive. His teeth were bared, a low, rumbling growl rising from his throat. Jake had never seen him like this. "What is it, buddy?" he whispered. Max snapped his head toward the staircase, his entire body bristling. Then he lunged. The German shepherd bolted toward the attic door with such force that his claws scraped against the wooden floor. He slammed into the door, snarling, barking wildly. Jake flinched. "Max, what are you—" Before he could finish, Max pounced again, scratching at the attic door like something was inside. A cold chill crawled down Jake's spine. Something was not right. Max's barking grew wilder, more frantic. His tail was stiff, his ears pulled back in pure aggression. He was acting as if there was something on the other side. Jake swallowed hard and reached for the doorknob. Locked. His palm was sweaty as he took out the rusted key. With trembling fingers, he slid it into the lock. Click. The door creaked open an inch. The air instantly changed. A blast of icy cold air rushed out, hitting Jake in the face. The hallway, which had been silent except for Max's barking, felt heavier, like something had just woken up. Max suddenly stopped barking. Jake's chest tightened. The German shepherd stood frozen, ears twitching, his gaze locked on the darkness beyond the cracked open attic door. "Then," he whimpered. Jake's heart pounded. Max never whimpered. His flashlight flickered. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Then a sound, a soft, slow creak from the attic, like someone shifting their weight. Jake's grip tightened on the flashlight. His mind screamed at him to close the door and leave, but he was already in too deep. He exhaled sharply, pushed the door open wider, and stepped inside. Max hesitated. The dog's body was rigid, tense, ears pinned back. His eyes never left the darkness ahead. Then, as if making a decision, he bolted inside before Jake could stop him. "Max, wait!" But the dog had already disappeared into the attic's shadows. Jake forced himself forward, his flashlight cutting through the thick layer of dust. The attic was cold, unnaturally cold. Old furniture, covered in tattered white sheets, stood like ghostly figures. Cobwebs hung from the rafters. Then, Jake's breath caught. In the far corner, Max was standing completely still. His tail was tucked, his ears flat against his head. His body trembled. Jake's stomach twisted. "Max?" The dog let out a soft, whining sound. Jake stepped closer, the flashlight shaking in his grip. Then he saw it. Handprints all over the attic walls. Small, child-sized handprints. They were smeared into the dust, scattered in all directions, some even leading up to the ceiling. Jake's breath hitched. Something was wrong. Max let out a low whimper. Then his head snapped towards something behind Jake. His lips curled back, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. Jake's blood ran cold. He could feel it, a presence, standing directly behind him, his chest constricted, his skin crawling with the unbearable sensation of being watched. Slowly, as if moving through water, he turned his head. The mirror. The same old cracked mirror from the nursery. Jake hadn't even noticed it before, and now it was facing him. His flashlight flickered. Max growled, louder this time. Jake's fingers trembled as he lifted the flashlight, and then the reflection moved. Jake's body went rigid. His reflection didn't match him. In the mirror, he was standing still, but his reflection was tilting its head to the side. Jake's breath turned shallow. His own reflection was smiling, a wide, unnatural grin. Then, slowly, his reflection lifted its hand and pointed. Not at Jake, at something behind him. The air turned ice cold. Max lunged forward, barking wildly. Jake spun around. The attic was empty, but the feeling of being watched was unbearable. Max snapped at the air, his teeth bared, his barking relentless. Jake stumbled backward. Then the mirror shattered. The sound was deafening. Shards exploded outward, glass cutting into his arm as he threw himself back. Max yelped, backing away from the broken shards. Jake landed hard, gasping, his heart racing. His head spun. Then, as the dust settled, he saw it, the wall behind the mirror. It was different because behind the shattered glass was another hidden compartment, and on that wall, scrawled in deep, jagged scratches, were words. "He took me." Jake's throat dried. His mind was spinning. Max let out a low whimper beside him, his tail still tucked, his ears flicking at every sound. Jake forced himself forward. He reached up, his fingers shaking, tracing over the scratched words. The dust and splinters clung to his skin, and then his fingertips brushed something else. A piece of fabric. Jake's breath caught. Carefully, he gripped the cloth and pulled. Something slid out from the hidden compartment. An old, tattered shirt, small, like it had once belonged to a child. Jake stared at it, his pulse hammering. Then he turned it over and froze. On the fabric, barely visible under years of dust and decay, was a name stitched in faded thread: Lucas Montgomery. Jake felt sick. The attic had been hiding more than just whispers. This was not just an old house with a tragic past. It was a prison, and Lucas had never escaped. Jake's hands trembled as he held the tattered child's shirt. The faded name, Lucas Montgomery, burned into his mind. Who was he? And more importantly, what happened to him? Max whined beside him, his ears flicking at every creak of the old attic. His body was still tense, his tail low, his eyes fixed on the shattered mirror. Jake swallowed hard, forcing his mind to think logically. There was an attic, there were handprints on the walls, there was a hidden compartment, and now there was a name. Someone had tried to hide something here, and it was time to find out what. Jake took a deep breath, then started examining the attic. He moved slowly, sweeping his flashlight over every surface. Max stayed close, sniffing the air, his body stiff with tension. Jake's eyes landed on a dusty wooden chest. It was old, its hinges rusted, its surface covered in deep scratches. Jake hesitated, then reached forward and lifted the lid. Creak. A thick cloud of dust rose, making him cough. Inside he found a bundle of old, yellowed papers, a broken toy car, a photograph. Jake carefully picked up the photograph. It was black and white, faded at the edges. It showed a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in front of the house. He had a wide grin, his hair messy, his small hands gripping the leash of a dog. Jake frowned. The dog in the picture looked exactly like Max. Same breed, same dark fur, sharp eyes and proud stance. His stomach twisted. How was that possible? Max was only 4 years old. This picture looked like it was decades old. Then he noticed something else. In the background, behind the boy, a man stood in the shadows of the porch. His face was obscured by darkness, but something about him felt wrong. Jake's fingers tightened around the photograph. Something terrible had happened here, and somehow Max already knew. Jake needed answers. Leaving the attic behind, he rushed downstairs, Max close on his heels. The house felt different now. The air was heavier. The floorboards groaned under his weight as if they were protesting. He pulled out his phone and began searching. Lucas Montgomery missing. He hit enter. The screen loaded slowly. Max let out a low growl, staring at the dark hallway behind them. Jake's pulse quickened. He reached out and locked the front door. The search results finally appeared, and what he found made his blood run cold. Lucas Montgomery, age 7, disappeared in 1978, last seen playing outside his home. No body was ever found. Jake's throat dried. The articles mentioned strange occurrences. Neighbors had reported hearing cries from the house long after the family had moved away. Jake's fingers shook as he scrolled. Then a final article caught his eye. Montgomery family dog found wandering the woods. Jake's stomach turned. According to the report, Lucas's dog had been found alive weeks after the disappearance. It was a German shepherd. Jake's eyes flicked toward Max. Max stared back. His golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Jake's breath came shaky. Was it possible? Could Max be connected to this somehow? A sudden crash echoed from the hallway. Jake jumped. Max snarled, ears pinned back. The sound had come from the basement. Jake's body went rigid. He had never opened the basement door before, but now it was wide open. A deep, dark staircase vanished into the shadows below. Jake's hands turned clammy. His flashlight flickered. Max stood at the edge of the basement stairs, growling. Jake swallowed hard. Something was down there, and he had no choice but to find out what. Jake's heart pounded as he stood at the edge of the basement stairs. The darkness below seemed endless. Max let out a low whimper, his tail flicking uncertainly. Jake tightened his grip on the flashlight. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. He took a deep breath and stepped down. The wooden steps creaked loudly under his weight. With each step, the air grew colder. Max followed closely, his ears pinned back. Jake reached the bottom and froze. The basement was huge, but completely empty. The walls were bare concrete. No furniture, no storage, nothing. His gut twisted. All that fear, all the mystery. For this? He swept the flashlight across the walls. Then he saw it, a single wooden door. It looked new, far too new for an old house like this. Jake's pulse quickened. He stepped forward and gripped the handle. Locked, Max sniffed the door, letting out a soft growl. Jake backed away. He needed something to break the lock. Rushing upstairs, Jake searched through the kitchen drawers. There, an old crowbar. Max followed as Jake hurried back down. With one hard strike, the lock snapped. The door swung open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, there was only one thing, a wooden box. Jake's hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped carefully in cloth, was a diary. Jake carefully opened the fragile pages. The handwriting was messy, a child's. The first entry read, "I do not like it here. The man watches me at night. Max does not like him either." Jake's throat tightened. Lucas had a dog named Max, just like his. He turned the pages. The entries became more desperate. "He comes into my room when I sleep. Max barks, but he does not go away. I tried to tell Mom. She said I was imagining it. I do not think I will be here much longer." Jake's fingers went numb. Max let out a low whine. Jake flipped to the final page, and his breath caught, scrawled in uneven, hurried letters. "If someone finds this, please help Max. Do not let him stay here." Jake's vision blurred. His Max, could it really be? No, that was impossible. Jake looked down at Max. The dog stared back at him. Deep, golden eyes filled with something more than instinct. Understanding, recognition, memories. Jake's breath hitched. Was Max trying to show him the truth this whole time? For the first time, Jake felt relieved. He had the truth. Lucas had lived here. Something terrible had happened to him, but Max, somehow, had survived. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe Max had come back to finish the story. Jake let out a breath. This was it. The mystery was solved. He pulled out his phone to call the police. Then, bang! A door upstairs slammed shut. Jake jumped. Max's fur bristled. Jake turned toward the basement stairs. Someone was in the house. His stomach dropped. Jake killed the flashlight. Silence, only the sound of his own heartbeat. Max pressed against his leg, tense. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. Jake's fingers curled into fists, then something whispered, "You should not have come back." Jake froze. Max let out a deep, rumbling growl. A shadow passed by the basement door, and just like that, the hope was gone. They were not alone. The real horror was only beginning. The air inside the hidden chamber was thick. Max whimpered. Jake could feel the weight of something old, forgotten. Agent Carter's fingers traced the carved message. "I never left." Jake's throat tightened. "Lucas Montgomery," Carter murmured. One of the officers frowned. "But how does this dog, your dog, know about all this?" Jake knelt beside Max, running a shaky hand over his fur. "I do not know." Then Max whined and nudged something on the floor. A small, rusted locket. Carter bent down, picked it up, and gently pried it open. Inside, a faded photograph, a young boy, and beside him, a German Shepherd puppy. Jake's breath hitched. The puppy in the picture had the same markings, the same eyes. It looked exactly like Max. But that was impossible. Agent Carter took a deep breath. Lucas Montgomery was 5 years old when he disappeared. Jake felt his chest tighten. What happened to him? Carter's expression darkened. His family moved here in 1986. His father, Richard Montgomery, was a strict man. His mother, Evelyn, passed away when Lucas was just 3. She gestured around the hidden chamber. Lucas spent a lot of time alone, until he got a puppy, a German Shepherd. Jake felt Max press against his leg. This dog, Carter sighed. Not exactly, but maybe a descendant, or something more unexplainable. Jake's head spun. What do you mean? Carter hesitated. Lucas's puppy was named Shadow. He was fiercely protective of the boy. They were inseparable. She flipped the photograph over, scrawled in messy handwriting, "Shadow and me forever." A lump formed in Jake's throat. So what happened? Carter's eyes darkened. One night, Lucas vanished. Richard Montgomery claimed he put Lucas to bed like always, Carter continued. But in the morning, the boy was gone. No forced entry, no broken windows, just gone. Jake swallowed hard, and the dog? Shadow was missing too. A chill ran down Jake's spine. The police searched for months, but there was nothing. No sign of Lucas, no sign of Shadow. The case went cold. She sighed. Years later, Richard Montgomery moved away. The house sat abandoned. No one wanted to live here. The walls seemed to breathe around them. Jake exhaled shakily. And now my dog is acting like he knows this place. Carter nodded. Because he does. Max suddenly whimpered and trotted to the far corner of the room. His tail wagged slowly. Jake's pulse spiked. Max? The dog pressed his nose against the wall. Then he wagged his tail faster. It is like he is greeting someone, Jake whispered. Carter took a slow step forward. Or remembering someone. Max turned back to Jake. His eyes glistened. Not with fear, but recognition. Jake's heartbeat pounded. It cannot be. Carter knelt beside Max, staring into his deep brown eyes. Dogs. Never forget. Jake's breath hitched. Are you saying? Carter nodded. Max is connected to Shadow. Silence. Then Max let out a low, mournful howl. The sound echoed through the hidden chamber. Jake's hands trembled. Max, were you always meant to find this place? The dog let out a soft, almost human-like whine. Carter exhaled. I do not know how, but this dog, he carries a memory that should have been lost. A memory of a boy, of Lucas, of a promise never fulfilled. Shadow and me, forever. Max was here to finish what Shadow started, to bring Lucas home. Jake's hands curled into fists. Then where is Lucas? Carter's face darkened. That is what we have to find out. She motioned to the officers. We need to check the entire house. There may be more hidden spaces. Jake's throat tightened. Max trotted back to him, pressing his head against Jake's knee. We're going to find him, buddy, Jake whispered. But deep down, he had a sinking feeling. Lucas Montgomery had never left this house. And now, they were about to find out why. Max's ears twitched, his body tensed. Jake could feel it. Something was wrong. The air inside the hidden chamber felt heavier. Agent Carter had barely finished speaking when, boom, a loud crash echoed through the house. Max barked furiously. Jake spun around, heart hammering. What was that? Another bang, from upstairs. One of the officers reached for his radio. We might have an intruder. Max snapped his head up. Then he sprinted toward the staircase. Max, wait! Jake yelled, chasing after him. The dog disappeared into the darkness above. Jake's boots thudded against the wooden steps as he ran. Carter and the officers followed. Max's barks turned into whines. Then silence. Jake's stomach dropped. Max? No response. He reached the second floor, heart pounding. The hallway was pitch black. Then a scraping sound. Jake swallowed hard. Something moved in the shadows. Max? His voice was barely a whisper. A low growl rumbled in the darkness. Not from Max, from something else. Jake slowly reached for his flashlight. Click. A beam of light cut through the darkness, and there he saw it. Max, standing completely still. His body was rigid, his fur bristled, his tail tucked, but his eyes, they were wide with fear. Max, Jake whispered, stepping closer. Then he saw why. The wall behind Max was covered in claw marks, deep, jagged, desperate, like someone had tried to scratch their way out. Jake's breath hitched. Max let out a low whimper. Then his gaze shifted. To the far end of the hallway, Jake followed his stare, and his blood turned to ice. A door, slightly open, darkness beyond it, and on the floor, a child-sized handprint. Jake couldn't move, his legs felt like stone. Carter stepped beside him, her face pale. Oh my God. One of the officers whispered, "Is that blood?" Jake's throat tightened. The handprint was smudged, faded with time, but it was real. Max let out a soft whine. Then he walked forward, straight towards the door. Jake's breath shook. "Max, wait!" Too late. The dog nudged it open. Creak! The door groaned as it swung inward. And inside, Jake's heart stopped. It was a child's bedroom, frozen in time, a dusty bed, a stuffed bear sitting on the pillow, a broken toy truck on the floor. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears. This was Lucas Montgomery's room, untouched, as if the boy had just left. Max padded forward slowly. His nose twitched. Then he let out a low, sorrowful whine. Jake's chest ached. Carter stepped forward. Shining her flashlight, something glinted near the bed, a locket, identical to the one they found earlier, only this one was broken. Jake bent down, carefully picking it up. He flipped it open. Inside, a photo of Lucas, and beside him, the original German Shepherd, Shadow. Carter exhaled sharply. "We need to get forensics up here, now!" She turned to an officer, but bang! A loud noise from downstairs. Max's head snapped up. He barked wildly. Then he took off. "Max!" No exclamation mark, Jake shouted, chasing after him. The dog raced down the stairs, straight to the basement. Max whipped around the corner. Then thud, a loud yelp. Jake's stomach dropped. "Max?" No answer. He sprinted to the basement door. It was wide open, darkness beyond it, and at the top of the stairs, Max's collar, lying on the floor. Jake's hands shook. He snatched up the collar. "Max." Silence. Then a low growl, but not from Max. From deep within the basement, a sound that made Jake's blood freeze. The officers pulled their weapons. Carter swallowed hard. "We go in together." Jake took a breath, stepped forward, and together they descended into the darkness. The air was thick with dust and tension. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears. "Max, hold on, buddy." He gripped the railing, forcing himself down the cold, creaking basement stairs. The officers followed, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Somewhere below, Max let out a weak whimper. Jake's chest tightened. "I'm coming, boy." Jake reached the bottom. His boots crunched against the damp dirt floor. The basement was massive. Old wooden crates, rusted tools, and a thick, musty smell that burned his nose, but his eyes locked onto one thing, a dark crawl space, and from inside, a soft, pained whimper. "Max!" Jake dropped to his knees. The opening was small, too tight for an adult to crawl through. His heart pounded. "I need something, anything." Carter and the officers searched frantically. Then, one officer yanked an old wooden plank from the floor. "We can pry it open!" They jammed the plank between the boards, pushed. Crack. The old wood splintered apart, and beyond it, Jake's breath hitched. Max lay inside, curled up, whimpering, his fur matted with dust, his body shaking, but he was alive. Jake didn't think. He lunged forward. "I've got you, buddy." Max whimpered softly. Jake's hands shook as he reached out. The dog's eyes fluttered. He was weak. But the moment he saw Jake, his tail thumped, just once. Tears burned Jake's eyes. "You're okay, boy. I've got you." He gently slid his arms under Max, lifted him carefully. The officers stepped in to help. Carter wiped her face. "We need to get him out of here. Now." Jake nodded. They carried Max out of the crawl space. The moment they stepped back into the open basement, Max let out a soft cry and nudged something with his paw. Jake froze. It was a box, small, rusted, locked. Jake's breath shook. "What is this?" Max whined, pressing his nose against it. Carter knelt beside them. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the old key they found earlier, a perfect match. Jake swallowed hard. He slowly inserted the key. Twisted click, the lock snapped open. He lifted the lid, and inside, his chest tightened. Old newspaper clippings, a child's bracelet, and at the bottom, a letter. Jake's hands trembled as he unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, but the first line hit him like a punch to the gut. "If anyone finds this, I am so sorry." His vision blurred. He kept reading. "I tried to save him. I tried to get Lucas out, but they wouldn't let me." Jake's stomach twisted. The letter told the real story. Lucas Montgomery wasn't just missing. He had been trapped. Someone had kept him locked away, and his only friend? A dog. Shadow. Jake's breath hitched. Max nudged his arm. Tears burned Jake's eyes. The dog tried to help him. Carter's voice was shaky, but it was too late. The truth hit like a brick. Lucas never escaped, and Shadow? He had never stopped trying to save him, just like Max had done tonight. Jake wiped his face. He pulled Max close. "You did good, boy. You did so good." Max let out a deep sigh. His body relaxed in Jake's arms. The officers stood in silence, the weight of the truth crushing them. But one thing was clear. Max had finished what Shadow started. He had found the truth, and now Lucas Montgomery's story would finally be told. Jake exhaled, pressing his forehead against Max's. "Let's go home, buddy." Max's tail wagged. Just once. The first real sign that everything would be okay. The night air was cold and heavy, but for the first time in hours, hope was stronger than fear. Jake clutched Max tightly in his arms. "We're getting you out of here, buddy." The officers surrounded them. Carter's voice was firm. "We need to move. Now." Jake nodded. His heart pounded. Max whimpered softly, his body weak, but his eyes still full of trust. They would not let him down. The officers led the way, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The basement stairs creaked beneath their hurried steps. Max stirred in Jake's arms, letting out a weak whine. "I know, buddy. Just hang on." As they reached the main floor, Carter pressed her radio. "Dispatch, we need emergency veterinary support. Injured dog, possible dehydration and exhaustion." A crackle. "Then copy that. Sending animal rescue unit now." Relief rushed through Jake, but they were not safe yet. The house was still dangerous, and Max needed help fast. Jake held Max closer. He could feel his heartbeat. Faint, too faint. "Stay with me, boy." Carter looked around, then pointed toward the side door. "This way. It's the fastest exit." They rushed forward. The floorboards groaned under their weight. But just as they reached the door, "Booze!" A loud crash echoed from behind. Jake's breath hitched. The basement door had just slammed shut, as if something, or someone, did not want them to leave. For a moment, silence. Then Max let out a soft growl. Jake swallowed hard. "Forget it. Let's go." Carter nodded. They burst through the door, into the night, into fresh air, and finally into safety. The second they stepped outside, sirens blared in the distance. The animal rescue van was already pulling up. A medic jumped out. "Over here," Jake called, his voice hoarse. The medic rushed forward, opening a soft stretcher. "Lay him down carefully." Jake hesitated, but he knew. They were here to save Max. Slowly he placed Max onto the stretcher. The dog's breathing was shallow, but his tail flicked weakly, as if he knew they were trying to save him. The medic did a quick check. Dehydrated, exhausted, but no major injuries. Jake exhaled, his legs nearly giving out. "He's going to be okay?" The medic nodded. "With fluids and rest, yes, but we need to get him to the vet immediately." Jake wiped his face. "Then let's go." The officers exchanged glances. Carter stepped forward. "Go with them. We will handle everything else here." Jake did not even hesitate. He climbed into the rescue van, sat next to Max, and for the first time all night, he let himself breathe. The van rumbled down the road. Max lay on a soft blanket, hooked up to a hydration V. His eyes were half closed, but every now and then his tail moved slightly. Jake reached out, ran a hand through his fur. "You scared me, buddy." Max let out a weak sigh. The medic smiled. "Dogs like him, they are fighters." Jake nodded, because he knew it was true. Max had not just fought for himself. He had fought for a truth long buried, a truth no one else had been willing to see. And now, because of him, it would never be forgotten. The vet's office was quiet. Dim lights, soft beeping from the machines, and in the middle of it all, Max. Resting, breathing steadily. Alive. Jake sat beside him, his hand resting gently on Max's fur. "You really scared me, buddy." Max's tail flicked just slightly, not much, but enough. A silent promise. "I'm still here." A knock at the door. The vet stepped inside, holding a clipboard. Her expression was calm. "He is lucky." Jake held his breath. "But—" The vet smiled. "No but. He is going to make a full recovery." Jake let out a breath he did not know he was holding. His hands clenched into fists, then relaxed. Max was safe. After everything, he had survived. Later that morning, Carter arrived at the clinic. She handed Jake a folder. Inside, a police report, Max's history. "We found out everything," she said. Jake flipped through the papers. Each word felt heavier than the last. Max had been owned before, a little girl, Emma Carter, Carter's own niece. Jake looked up, shocked. "Wait, you mean—" Carter's eyes glistened. "She went missing years ago. Max must have been trying to find her, or tell someone the truth." The air in the room felt thicker. Jake looked down at Max. The dog's golden brown eyes stared back, as if waiting for something. "What happens to him now?" Jake asked. Carter hesitated. That depends. Jake frowned. On what? Carter smiled softly. On you. Jake sat with Max in the recovery yard. The sun was warm on their backs. Max sniffed the air, his tail wagging gently. For the first time in a long while, he looked at peace. You ready to go home, buddy? Jake asked. Max tilted his head, his ears perked up. Jake chuckled. That is the thing, though. Where is home? Max blinked. Then he lifted his paw and placed it on Jake's knee. Jake's throat tightened. Is that your answer? Max wagged his tail. Jake laughed, shaking his head. All right. I get it. Looks like you were stuck with me, pal. Max barked happily, like he had always belonged here, like he had finally found what he had been searching for. And maybe Jake had too. Weeks later, Max was strong again, his fur shiny, his eyes bright. But there was still one thing missing, or rather, someone. Jake had done his research, and that led him to a quiet little house on the other side of town. He knocked. The door creaked open. An elderly woman stood there. Her eyes widened the moment she saw Max. Oh my God, Jake nodded. Mrs. Carter? She clutched her chest. It cannot be Max. Max's ears twitched. His tail froze. Then he bolted forward, not running away, but running home, straight into the woman's arms. Tears streamed down her face. You are alive after all these years. Jake swallowed hard. He never stopped looking for Emma. The woman nodded. Neither did I. For a long moment no one spoke, just the soft sound of a dog who had finally, after so many years, found the last piece of his past. Later that night, Jake sat with Max under the stars. That was your family, huh? Max lay beside him, silent but content. I will take you back if you want, Jake said. Max lifted his head, looked straight at him. Then he licked Jake's hand, slow, deliberate, a choice, a decision, a new home. All right then, Jake said, rubbing Max's fur. Looks like we are family now, buddy. And for the first time, Max closed his eyes. Safe. Loved, and finally, home. When we started this story, there was a lonely German shepherd, acting strangely, trying to communicate something, but by the end, we saw that his loyalty, courage, and love not only solved a mystery, but also gave him a new life. And this was not just a story, it was an emotional journey that was not only Max's, but ours too. If you enjoyed this story, let me know. Are you satisfied with Max's ending? What would you have done if you were in Jake's place? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback is important. Every story has emotions behind it, and behind every emotion there is a voice, yours. If you want us to bring more gripping and emotional stories, then your feedback is crucial. Did you enjoy the suspenseful parts the most, or was it the moment when Max finally found his home? Drop a comment. Every comment helps us make the next story even better. Are you ready for the next story? If you loved this story, then make sure to subscribe. Why? Because we are bringing more emotional dog rescue stories, shocking twists and suspenseful moments, stories that will truly touch your heart. And here is a special surprise. If you subscribe and turn on the bell icon, you will be the first to watch our next story. So do not miss out on any heartwarming and thrilling stories. Subscribe now. A special question for you. If Max were another dog, solving a different mystery, what kind of story would you want to see? A haunted house, a lost treasure, or a story idea that only you can imagine? Share your ideas in the comments. The most interesting idea will be the inspiration for our next story. So go ahead, talk to us, share your thoughts, and be part of this journey. This journey is amazing with you. Every story is not just words and visuals. It is an experience that we love sharing with you. If you enjoyed this story, show your support, like this video, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more. and we will see you in the next story. Another unforgettable journey awaits. Blast off.